Well, good evening, friends. After all of that build-up, I appreciate all of it. One of the things I say often about my relationship with Partners for Sacred Places is that we have grown up together in so many ways. And so what I hope to do tonight is to, on this occasion, which is so critical for the work we're called to do together, is to offer a reflection of how we got here, how I got here, which I think is intricately tied together with how Partners has impacted our country, religious communities, houses of worship across the country and beyond, and to help perhaps give us some inspiration for our future. Now, as the Episcopal Bishop of the Diocese of Indianapolis, which is the Episcopal Church in central and southern Indiana, it's about 2/3 of the state, I spend a lot of time as the chief pastor and teacher and preacher preaching. So I just want to let you know that I will not get too preachy, I hope, except for about this passion for what our buildings mean in our communities and for those who have loved them and used them as places to find care and love and inspiration for leading their lives. I want to take a moment of personal privilege and note that my journey is marked by so much interaction with so many people in this room and folks we've honored tonight. I would not be here without so many folks who are here, and particularly Thomas Pike, who was generous enough to make space for me to sit at his feet. I asked for an appointment. He didn't know who I was. I was 23 years old and was trying to figure out what would I do with this passion for serving God's people, perhaps as a minister. I wasn't quite yet on that road, but also I loved buildings, and I didn't know what to do. And I knew, because my first job was made possible by connections with the New York Landmarks Conservancy, which is how I found out about Bob, that maybe there was a way through. And Tom Pike helped me figure it out. So I am in his debt. That conversation was the beginning of many other conversations, which led me to understanding that the way to get here perhaps had something to do with following Bob Yeager, which is why I went to Cornell to get my preservation degree and to think about having the time and space to focus on buildings that were places of worship. There were all kinds of things my classmates were studying, but he had set the path for concentrating with some thesis work on churches. And I thought, well, maybe I could do that too. So off I went to Ithaca. But thanks to Bob and so many, I can trace this line from the late 80s to early 90s to being here at this moment. So much inspired leadership and guidance. Now, one of my favorite quotes is one you might know from Hemingway's book, The Sun Also Rises. And you know, in that novel, there's that great and helpful phrase where Mike is asked about how he went bankrupt, and he says, 2 ways, gradually, then suddenly, right? I actually preach about that concept all the time, but for our purposes, this convening, activating hidden assets, making the most of sacred places for the wider community, this has been a long time coming. It's been a long time coming. The endangered state of many sacred places and the communities they serve is a lesson in gradually, then suddenly. Houses of worship are closing at alarming rates, and we don't exactly have firm numbers. They're kind of hard to come by. Some sources cite that, say back in 2019, about 4,500 Protestant churches alone closed. About 3,000 opened, not in the same buildings, but there is this shifting ground. There is no comprehensive figure, but denominational offices and preservation organizations note that there is a precipitous shift underway. We know it. With these closures, communities across the country are threatened with the loss of not only significant architectural landmarks, but civic and social anchors as well. As significant as these losses are, I shudder to think of the situation that we would be in were it not for the research and the collaboration and the interventions made by so many of you in this room. And yet, we gather here because we know there is so much more to do. Indeed, gradually, then suddenly goes both ways. Gradually, then suddenly isn't just about how things can go bad. It can also be about the way things go right. And so we come together now in the nick of time to consider future possibilities for sacred places in their communities that are about vitality and, I would hope, even flourishing. So 31 years ago, summer of 1993, I worked in what was then the Information Clearinghouse of Partners of Sacred Places. It was my summer internship between my 2 years at grad school. And the clearinghouse was the place that you called with like any kind of particular or random question that had to do with a church or religious building. So 1 minute it might be, I don't know what to do about these stained glass windows that are falling out of the building. The next minute it might be, we need a capital campaign consultant. We don't know where to start. All kinds of questions would come to that office, and it was my job to do some research and figure out some answers. But I also, in my spare time, would go through all of these books that were in the library there, and I would read about redundant churches, which was the term in England for all of the empty buildings dotting the English landscape. I read books about churches and synagogues trying to figure out, like, what do we do with this space? And articles and questions about sharing space, which was a radical idea at the time. So that summer, I had a little project at Partners where I helped to do the research for a white paper about shared space, and it turned into my master's thesis. So I'm going to apologize in advance. I'm going to be sharing a lot from that thesis. So here we go. The thesis title was Churches as Effective Partners in Community Revitalization, New Initiatives for Building Restoration and Community Involvement. So in 1994, I wrote that this work proves that collaborative efforts of churches, preservationists, and philanthropists through church-sponsored nonprofit organizations can restore and rehabilitate religious properties while positively impacting downtown neighborhoods. That was what I spent a year and a half focusing on. Now, friends, I am here to confess. I'm not proud of it, but I'm here to confess that I've been reworking and rewriting that thesis almost since the minute it was bound and sent off. Like, I wrote it, I got it done, and then I've been working it out ever since. So don't get me wrong, I don't think that the premise was wrong. Over the past 30 years, Partners for Sacred Places has conducted the studies to prove the exponential impact of sacred places sharing space beyond their worship constituencies. And 30 years later, my 2 case studies that I did in this thesis, the First Unitarian Church of Oakland, California, and its Center for Urban Family Life, and the Catholic Cathedral of the Assumption in Louisville, Kentucky, with their Cathedral Heritage Foundation, they're doing great. The buildings have been restored. Those organizations are still having an impact in their communities. That was great. I defended that thesis on August 1994, and then 2 weeks later got on a plane to California to begin seminary to prepare for the priesthood. And it was in that time, almost literally as I was going across the country, I thought, I think I didn't really get it. And then I spent seminary figuring out how much I didn't really know. I had to learn from the inside out how much capacity was needed to really develop trust and expertise between churches and preservationists and the philanthropic community. I saw it happen in a couple of places, but those were rare. And I will tell you that after nearly 28 years of ordained ministry in the Episcopal Church, I've learned that nurturing these collaborations between sacred places and community organizations and preservationists and philanthropists, it takes time, so much time, and so much intention. 2 commodities that are in short supply for pastors and religious leaders. So when I became the rector or head pastor of a church for the first time in 2004 in Syracuse, it took several years of building trust with that congregation to even pave the way for future collaborations with the community, to trust that the preservation community and others in our neighborhood could be entrusted with our building. I thought it would be a cakewalk. It turns out it needed a lot of time, a lot of trust building. But now, looking at the broader religious and preservation landscape, I think back then I could not have predicted the rapidity of change and diminishment in worship attendance practices that we see today. I could not have foreseen the outsized pressures placed on houses of worship to provide food and shelter to those in need in their communities. And I had not yet imagined the gaps that sacred places could fill in what makes so much sense to us now, but I didn't imagine that they could really be the ones coming in to be those places where you could engage the arts, music, theater, dance. All of that was something I could not have seen those years ago. As bishop, I spend my time going every Sunday, congregation to congregation in a rotation, 46 properties in my care, 47 congregations. One of them doesn't yet have a building, but they want to build one. It's a lot of getting on the ground to understand what's happening in these spaces, in these communities. Thanks to the Thriving in Ministry grant program of the Lilly Endowment, I've been able to operationalize my thesis by looking at 81 churches in the state of Indiana and trying to put building and mission together to see whether they are in sync, and if not, to create a new conversation. And so I'm here to tell you that project, Church Buildings for Collaborative Partnerships, has literally changed the conversation between church and community leaders, and between church leaders and preservationists. And I will say that as I meet every month with the Archbishop of Indianapolis, with heads of the Synod for the Presbytery, the heads of the Methodist Church, all of these judicatory leaders, we meet on the first Thursday of the month, and every single time we meet, guess what comes up? What do we do with the buildings? Or they will say, here's what we're doing, and it makes me almost have a heart attack, because we don't know. We don't know always the things to do. We are having these conversations in ways that we did not have them even a decade ago. And I am grateful that even as we wonder what are the next best things to do in Indiana with the partnerships we have with Indiana Landmarks, we have people nearby who we can go to help us figure it out. I don't know what Indiana would look like without those collaborations with Indiana Landmarks and the Lilly Endowment and so many other civic organizations that say we have to be in this together. So while the challenges and pressures are significant, I'd like to imagine what might be possible if we cast a vision for 35 years from now. What might that look like? With the expertise and passion in this room, it is not too late to create a path for 2059 that brings these hidden assets to the forefront for the benefit of our communities. Gradually, then suddenly, can be a story of revitalization. It is not too late to strengthen the positive impact houses of worship can have, even in the most rural of places, even in the places in our cities that seemed most troubling, even in the suburbs where people seem to be disconnected. We can have impact in all of those places. It is not too late to thoughtfully preserve the brick and mortar artifacts of religious faith and practice. It is not too late to marshal our resources and deepen our partnerships and forge new collaborations to the benefit of sacred places and their communities. I'm here to tell you that many religious leaders who have been kind of skittish are growing more open to this work, and many are ready right now to try a new thing, to have a different conversation. The former dichotomy between, pitting buildings and mission, people versus the building, all of that is going away. It's being dismantled. And so in the nick of time, the religious leaders I speak with understand how useful their buildings can be to supporting their mission of serving others. I will tell you, last month I spent a time at our semi-annual House of Bishops for the Episcopal Church. It's about 140 bishops who gather, and we were given an afternoon to say, pick a topic, put it on the newsprint, and then see who wants to show up for their conversation. So I put up preservation, real estate, housing, affordable housing on your property. I had 25 dioceses across the Episcopal Church represented. 27 people said, we need to have this conversation. Here are our questions. This is what we don't know. This is what we need to know. I couldn't believe it. We had to get an extra room because we couldn't fit in our little table that I thought was going to come to draw people. It was packed. And we discussed the challenges and innovations related to property care and preservation and development. And there are exciting things happening, but we need guidance. We need collaboration. We are cautiously hopeful about the future for our church properties. And of course, religious leaders were trained to be hopeful, right? Like, that's a thing we should be able to do with ease. But I will tell you, we cannot be hopeful all by ourselves. We all need to be hopeful about this future. Indeed, here is where my religious conviction meets my passion for transforming our communities through sacred places. Because at the end of the day, as it has been from the beginning, all of us, we need each other to do the work that is going to make a difference. We need each other to understand the challenges and the depth of the challenges that we face. We need each other to do the research, to understand just how many losses of houses of worship are happening. What is the depth of the vulnerability of the places that we pass by as we drive around and we think, well, it's here today, but will it be here tomorrow? We need to know what the rate of closure is across faith traditions. And building on the concept of the halo effect, we need to know what is the impact on the communities that have come to depend on the programs that these churches and synagogues and temples house. What happens when they go away? What happens when we lose our centers where we are providing food and counseling and daycare, preschools, clinics, polling places? When we lose houses of worship and when they're lost to vacancy, or neglect, or demolition, we lose so much more. We still have much to learn about how deeply houses of worship have anchored these communities across our country. And my hope for this time together, for this convening, is that we'll begin to gain a fuller understanding of what stabilization and community development looks like in the current conditions of religious practice. Not what they used to be, but what they are right now. So I'm dreaming. I'm already dreaming about what we as preservationists and religious property owners and philanthropists and community developers and researchers, I'm dreaming about what we could accomplish with intention, with collaboration, with seeking a positive impact for our communities and the people who live and work in them. So I'm going to ask you to indulge me just one more time. I want to close with this closing paragraph of this Masters Thesis, which will probably never see the light of day again now that I've kind of reworked it all the way through. But this is what I wrote. These were the words of an optimistic 26-year-old who still had a lot to learn. I wrote, the collaboration of the religious preservation and foundation communities, when coupled with compromise, just may offer the win-win situation that is needed to save our cities. However, these types of partnerships are usually complicated and costly in time and resources. They even present some element of risk, for in some instances they represent paradigm shifts from the status quo. At the center of the issue is whether the autonomy of the status quo is more affordable than a collaborative partnership. Even then, who is liable for the costs? As churches, synagogues, and temples across the country close for their myriad reasons, or are demolished or lost to acts of vandalism, and as poverty, joblessness, homelessness, illiteracy, and the like take their toll on society, it becomes clear who pays the price. The motto for the preservation community through the new millennium, this was 1994, remember? The motto for the preservation community must be united we stand, divided we fall. And the religious community must stand alongside the preservationists in that refrain. Close quote. So friends, here we are, gathered from the sectors of religion and philanthropy and architecture and government and academia, nonprofits, media. We're gathered because we know that the solutions to the future we desire is really only possible by coming together. The past 35 years have shown us what is possible against impossible odds. So I'm looking forward to our collaborative future with hope. May generations to come experience a gradually then suddenly that's filled with strengthened communities and partnerships and the sacred places we love so much. Thank you.